Hi folks, this is Dr. Nigel Brayer again, and today we're going to talk about sex. Yes, sex hormones, that is. So we need to talk about big key hormones that influence our bladder health, okay? So as you all know, as men are primarily, they have testosterone, they have thyroxine, which is a thyroid hormone, and tiny bit of estrogen and not too much progesterone. Ladies, of course, have estrogen, progesterone, thyroxine, and of course the pituitary hormones affect men and women. Most importantly today, I want to talk about how progesterone, estrogen, thyroxine, and the adrenal hormones all influence not only your whole body, but in particular for this discussion, our bladder health. So let's talk about progesterone for a moment. So as most of you ladies know, is the ovaries are the key producers of progesterone. The estrogen is produced in the body, and the pituitary gland is in the brain, and it's kind of the head honcho gland that tells all the other glands how to work. And then you have the adrenal glands, which create cortisol and other hormones that are mostly responsive for the mostly in charge of, the stress response. So let's talk about how hormone affects tissue. So estrogen at the early part of a menstruating woman's cycle starts to build up what's called the endothelial lining. So all tissues have a lining internally. It's called the endothelium. The uterus in particular has an endothelium, and estrogen allows things to build up. So menstruating ladies will notice that during that time of the month, they're going to start to hold fluid a little bit more. They're going to feel a little puffier. They're going to feel a little bit more swollen. Those are the effects of estrogen. Now, the ladies out there who've had children, this early part of the menstrual cycle creates puffiness, but a lot of ladies, when they are about third trimester in pregnancy, they feel amazing. And so a lot of the gals go, I never felt so good in my life until I was 3 months pregnant. And that's because they started to experience the effect of progesterone. So progesterone is what's called a secretory hormone. So what that does is that's a metabolic hormone. That means it revs you up. It's kind of like the male's testosterone. Testosterone in male gives them energy, helps build muscle mass, helps build libido. Progesterone is similar in women. So estrogen helps hold on and helps build cells and tissues up. Progesterone, what it does is it starts to get those cells ready for something. Now, of course, if a sperm and an egg meet in that area and that implants, it's getting ready for fertilization and to grow that egg into a fetus. Now, let's backtrack a tiny bit. That's what happens during pregnancy. During the menstrual cycle, the first part of the month builds up with estrogen. Then mid-cycle, after what's called ovulation, the egg is released. The outer part of the egg produces what's called progesterone. That progesterone causes the body to increase metabolic rate. It gets the uterus ready for implantation. Now, if that doesn't happen, then progesterone and estrogen fall together and the uterus loses its lining. That's what's called the menstrual cycle. That's having a period. Now, as a lady ages, certain hormones start to change. The eggs aren't as viable as they used to be. The progesterone level tends to be less robust, but the estrogen tends to be more dominant still. Now, one of the big problems in current society is many different chemicals act like estrogens. They're called xenoestrogens. So if you remember what an estrogen does, estrogen builds up tissue. Well, if I'm exposed to chemicals, that could be perfumes, that could be the smelly things people put in their house, that could be cleaning products, that could be things out in the air. Those chemicals can behave like an estrogen. When things behave like an estrogen, they start to build up. If you remember, estrogen builds things up. That's why cancer is such a big problem these days in estrogen, because estrogen causes things to build and to multiply. So let's think about this from the perspective of the bladder health. Is if you have the bladder starting to build the endothelial lining, it starts to become thicker. Cells that are healthy or unhealthy start to grow. You see how cancer can become an issue. So what happens when our estrogen cycle and progesterone cycle become imbalanced? The tissues start to respond inefficiently. Can you imagine how this might affect your bladder? What happens if the tissue now is bigger in the pelvic region? It happens if the abdomen is pushing more onto the bladder. That bladder has to have more integrity to hold your urine. What happens with the sphincter or the valves? What happens if they start to thicken or if they become less controlled by the muscles in the nervous system? You see how hormones and their balance can start to affect that function. That's why one of our key components with helping a woman find her balance with bladder control and health is to look into what's the hormones, how are they influencing her, and how do we balance them as she ages.